We are on page 100.
Very.
And 1 at the bottom. We're at 102, but I'll just repeat 101 for a minute. The Kuzari, the king, says to the rabbi, because you say that Hashem gave you tablets, and because you say that Hashem created the heavens with his fingers, and so on and so forth, must mean that you believe in a physical God, meaning a God that has a physical form. I'm reminding that whoever's listening, the word God doesn't necessarily mean God the way it's used on the Christian street. But God is what we would use in English to refer to Hashem, or Yud Kei Vav Kei. So we're referring to a completely different concept. Page 102, the rabbi responds. Amar hechaver, says the rabbi, Chalila la'el min hasheker. God forbid that you could ascribe such a lie to Hashem. V'shiyavo b'Torah ma she'asechel marchik oto, v'simehu shaker. You can't believe that the Torah would write something that logic dictates to be false. I mentioned last week, 2 weeks ago, that it's not necessarily... This statement can be easily misunderstood. There are many things in the Torah that negate nature, but not logic. It could be that we split a seed. That doesn't go against logic, that goes against nature. But it goes against logic to understand something that's illogical. The Torah couldn't command you such a thing. When the Torah tells you, an eye for an eye, ayin tachat ayin. Someone pokes out, God forbid, Reuven's eye, so Reuven pokes out Shimon's eye. Chalila la'el min hasheker. God forbid that you could say that Hashem would say such a lie. But he said it. But the Rambam tells us that the same God who created the Torah also created our sechel, also created our intellect. And if something in the Torah goes against our intellect, or vice versa, then it's a real problem. It's a real problem. And it can't be that a Kadosh Baruch Hu would tell us such a thing. Oh. I was thinking today, I don't know how related it is, about what's being referred to in the world as fundamentalist Islam. I don't know if there's such a thing. Fundamentalist, non-fundamentalist. If it says in the book, it says in the book, no? And someone asked a very intelligent question. Just in my class the other night, how did the Muslims go from being a people who were mathematicians, were scientists, were philosophers? And the Rambam told us the worst. The Rambam was in a generation where the Muslims, they were scholars and philosophers, and all of a sudden these crazy Muslims showed up out of nowhere and chased the Rambam, persecuted other religions. You have to know, I don't know, I can't vouch for Islam. I'm not a Muslim, I don't believe in Islam, I don't believe in any of the prophets of Islam, I don't believe in any of the books of Islam, more than I believe in a comic book. But, you have to understand that wherever there is a religion, there's a philosophy, there's a theology, there are also people who teach it, and people who educate people in it, and communities that observe it. See, if somebody were to become Jewish and he lived in the middle of the Sahara Desert and somehow a Beit Din came from heaven and converted him to Judaism, no matter how many Jewish books he read, he would never know how to live, breathe, walk, and talk like a Jew. And essentially you find that today, Baruch Hashem, with the amount of people who are coming close to Judaism and coming close to Torah, you find that many people are reviving Jewish texts, they're reviving Jewish laws, they're reviving Jewish verses from the Torah, from the Tanakh, without the proper social, communal, rabbinic guidelines that come along with reviving such texts. To the point where you'll find people who revive such things like you can't eat bread that was baked by a non-Jew. Now we know that the rabbis in the Talmud already got rid of such an edict. Oh, so why don't they eat such a thing? It's almost a fundamentalist approach to Judaism. Because it says so in a book. Doesn't make a difference that no other community observed this. Doesn't make a difference that other rabbis didn't observe this. It says so in a book, that must be what it means. It says in the Torah, an eye for an eye, this must be what it means. Rabbi said, how could you say such a thing? HaKadosh Baruch Hu is trying to create a perfect world. It's going to tell you if someone pokes at your eye, you go poke at his eye. And then what do we accomplish? 2 people who are missing eyes. Thus, it can't mean such a thing. Rather, what happens if someone gets damaged physically by someone else?
You have to pay?
Yeah, you pay the value. How much damage have I caused another person? Kehillat, someone caused another person by taking away their hand, taking away their eye, taking away their whatever it was that was taken away. Kuzari, Rabbi Yonatan Halevy is saying, you cannot allow yourself to believe in things that go against your logic, because the same HaKadosh Baruch Hu, says the Rambam, that created the Torah also created your logic. Let's not be newcomers to Judaism, and let's rely on real Jewish texts when we understand our Judaism. I say this across the board. I say this when it comes to Sidurim. I say this when it comes, just now, there's a halakha in Shulchan Aruch. You don't need to share the details of halakha. Halakha says you have to do something. And Rabbi Yosef Mashash writes, and Rabbi Yosef Mashash writes in his book, Otzar HaMichtavim, he says it can't be, even though it says in Shulchan Aruch. But no one has ever done this before. And to come now and do this would at best be damaging and at worst be showing off. Certain things Am Yisrael has done, not done, the rabbis have guided us on. Chalila la'el min ha-sheker. It doesn't make a difference if the Torah says Hashem had a hand, Hashem had a leg, Hashem took you, created the world with his fingertips. It doesn't make a difference. What makes a difference is the way that Am Yisrael has interpreted such things. The way the rabbis have told us this is what HaKadosh Baruch Hu meant when he said it.
Can you connect that back to your fault with Islam?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Like
By the Muslims, I'm sure that once upon a time, and it could be because they didn't even care what it said in the Quran. They were philosophers, they mingled with other religions, and the Quran is a book filled with much hatred for the world. You must know that. It's filled with many evil things inside of it. That's the reason we're Jews and not Muslims. But there must have been a time where either people didn't care what it said in the Quran, or they were guided by a social system which philosophy, art, science was more valuable to them than what was written word for word inside of their Quran. But the moment people came and back into this religion, we have to read exactly what it says. Let's forget who we were. Let's forget. The Muslim nation went from being a nation that in the times of our rabbis here were respected to a nation today which is perhaps the most violent, uneducated, and unsophisticated nation on this earth. And I say this only because they were once in a different place. And I say this because whether you like it or not, we're family. We're family. I told you there are always cousins you don't like, or cousins that don't like you. But it's something to be aware of. We cannot, and I see today as a rabbi that Judaism is slipping further and further and further into what soon we might have to label fundamentalist Judaism. I'm sure that in my lifetime there will be such a term. I'm sure that in my lifetime there will be such an approach. The fact that there are religious nationalists in Israel that would go stab an Arab in the street in the name of Judaism tells me, you see the face you just made?
Yeah.
But 100 years from now, you don't know if people are going to make that face anymore.
I don't know if 10 years from now.
Because they're vocal, and people are loud, and people are strong, and people make things up. In this country, just 60 years ago, people didn't keep Gilad kosher. They just ate normal kosher. And in Sfaradim, we always ate Gilad kosher. But Ashkenazim in this country never did such a thing. And in 60 years, it has become to the point where if you know somebody that doesn't keep Gilad kosher, he might as well be eating ham and sandwiches and bacon for breakfast. How did that happen? How did all the rabbis of the community do one thing, and then it spiraled out of control? It's the way the world works, when you're not willing to put an end to something that goes against the way you're supposed to do things. And sometimes people say, Rabbi, why are you so critical of other groups of Jews? Why do you criticize other people? It doesn't come from a place of hatred. It comes from a place of, I love Hashem, and I love the Torah, and I love the Jewish people too much for you to have a voice. I love you too much for you to be able to say the nonsense that you're saying. And that's why I say the things that I say. Chalila la'el min ha-sheker. We have to put this on. God forbid that you can attribute such a lie to God. It would be terrible. Yeah.
This is sort of like aside. I was with this group of people. They were talking. They were saying that there was talk that the Arabs don't come from Ishmael. Is that? I mean, does that make sense?
Sure. Just like there's talk that Jews don't come from Yaakov.
Oh, it's the same.
Meaning, I'm sure it could be that the Muslims conquered countries and nations and people, just like the Christians conquered nations and people. We still attribute them spiritually to Esav. You have Christians that are from Africa. Clearly they're not from Esav. But these categories of Yishmael, Esav, Israel, you can be born in an Irish Catholic family and one day find yourself Jewish. It's not an ethnicity as much as a spiritual ethnicity. It's a genealogy that goes back to who was their forefather. Their forefather was Yishmael. It doesn't make a difference if they're really from Yishmael or not from Yishmael. Therefore, just like Amalek, Rav Soloveitchik suggests that Amalek is not necessarily an ethnicity, but there are people. He claimed that someone like Hitler, I can't prove to you he's from Amalek. People make up all kinds of stories. Yeah, we know. We don't know anything about Hitler and where it came from and Amalek. But I can tell you, the spiritual purpose, it's funny to call it a spiritual purpose, but the deeper meaning of Amalek is definitely attributable to Hitler and to the Nazis and to that entire world. So yes, is he Amalek? Of course he's Amalek. Is he really Amalek? It doesn't make a difference. Not unless I want to give him a genealogy report, and I'm not. Okay. Right?
Not unless you're Mormon, it doesn't really matter.
So continues Rabbi Yonatan Halevy. I should say something. Just beware of fundamentalist Jews. I must tell you, beware of them. Even those who come to me today and I hear it says in Kabbalah that you're going to be reincarnated like this and you can come back like that and you're going to be a camel, it's going to be the third hump and it's going to be because you looked at a magazine inside of... I don't know what they tell you. I'm going to tell you the truth. The Mekubalim wrote these things not for people to be sharing them to the entire world on YouTube. They wrote these things for people who truly understand what these concepts of Gilgulim, of reincarnations, of Schar va'onesh, of what does it mean to be going through something in this world because of something in a past life. Most of us haven't even figured out this life yet. And for us to spend our time figuring out what we did in a previous life would be an absolute waste of our time. Just today we have people who are fundamentalists. They found something in a book and they want to share it with us. Rabbi Yosef Masas, I mentioned his name again. There was a rabbi who said, I wrote a whole book proving people why they have to come back to Judaism. And he went through all these books of the Mekubalim. What's going to happen, and after 120 years, you're going to find yourself boiling in kind of hot water, and your face is going to fall, all kinds of crazy things he wrote there. Rabbi Yosef Masas wrote, not just as a damaging thing to say, and not only are you going to lose more Jews with this approach than gaining them, he said, you have a bad imagination. He said, and all these things that you're imagining, he said, they're dangerous things to imagine, and you're not allowed to spread them. He said, and you're going to tell me you found them in books, and they're holy books that say the same thing? So I will tell you, the authors of those books had terrible imaginations also. Now, how can you dismiss an entire genre of Jewish literature? I don't have to, but I can tell you, Rabbi Yosef Masas would agree that at best you shouldn't be teaching it, and at worst, it might not even be true. Says Rabbi Yonatan Halevy, Utchilat aseret hadvarim, the first of the 10 commandments, Hu hatzivui shenamin be'Elohim, is the commandment that we believe in Hashem. What's the second commandment?
You can't worship any other gods.
Very good. Now, if I would go to a group of Christians and ask them, give me the 10 commandments, they would know. If I would ask a Jew the 10 commandments, he wouldn't know. If I would ask a Jew, what are the 13 principles of faith, which if you don't believe in them, you will not go to the next world? How many of them could tell me that? What are the 13 principles of the Rambam's faith? So you don't know all of them by heart? You have to start saying it every day after tefillah. If you don't know the 13 principles of faith by heart, so you have to start working on it now. It's inexcusable for a Jew to not know the 13 principles of faith, to not know the Aseret HaDibot, to not know how many days it took Hashem to create the world, to not know certain things we know, to not know which Hebrew year it is. Certain things we must know. And it's hard here. We live in a world that's not conducive to this thought process. There are 6 constant mitzvot a person must always be thinking about. Okay, so it could be that we don't have the consciousness to think about the 6 constant mitzvot, but at the very least to know what they are. Vashani, what's the second thing? What's the second commandment? What Marlene said? Hazhara me'avod Elohim achirim. It's the prohibition of worshipping other gods. When it says other gods, why doesn't it just say worshipping different gods? Why other gods? It comes to include, when you say other, what are you implying?
Anything other than Hashem.
Right, and also you're implying?
No other thing, no other God, no other power.
Also implying you can't believe in other gods in combination with Hashem. You can't say I believe in Hashem and I also believe in
You couldn't.
Baba Lulu, the other god of the
That's
sun.
what's interesting.
You can't, right? You cannot believe in such a thing. You either believe in a Kadosh. This is a fancy term for avodah zara b'shituf. It's called. It's idol worship by shituf, by connecting gods. Saying I believe in Hashem, but I believe in another god. The fact that you believe in a second god means you're taking away from a Kadosh Baruch Hu the ability to be all powerful, and taking away a Kadosh Baruch Hu's ability to be all powerful is avodah zara. U'ma'asut pesel. We also have a prohibition of making an idol. Utmuna, or any images, the tavnit, and any shapes. Uchlalo shel davar mehagshim. We have a prohibition of turning God into something physical. Says Rabbi Yonatan Halevy, how dare you blame the Jews that because we use words like Hashem took us out of Egypt with a mighty hand? How dare you attribute to us something that goes against logic? Says especially it goes against what it says inside of the Torah. The Torah says you're not allowed to. You might want to know that the Rambam and Baruch Spinoza, not Havdil Elef al Hayavdo, two different people. Rambam was our tzaddik Yisod Olam. Baruch Spinoza was like your doormat. And Rasha Merusha, an evil man, that was excommunicated by the Jewish community, started in a good place. He had a chance to be a big Talmid Chacham, a chance to be a big Torah scholar. It pains me that in the Jewish academic world today, even in the Orthodox Jewish academic world, Baruch Spinoza has made a comeback like some revolutionary. Our rabbis took him off the Jewish map for a reason. He was a dangerous man with dangerous ideologies and thoughts. We have to learn about him to know which mistakes not to make. But Baruch Spinoza said, listen, the Torah says that God is physical. Oh, you tell me that it goes against logic? Good for you, but I have to go. The author of the Torah, he didn't believe in God. The author of the Torah says that God had an arm, God had fingers. He ends up making a U-turn and says at the end, Baruch Spinoza said, no, Hashem is not physical, but only because the Torah says that Hashem is not physical. But not because it's illogical to believe. But you have to believe an author and whatever he says. So the author says Hashem has a hand, and then he says Hashem's not physical, so I have to believe in that he's not physical. The Rambam says, well, you're crazy. Obviously the Rambam lived before. But the Rambam was aware of such personalities. And the Rambam says it's simply illogical to believe in a physical Hashem, and there's nothing to talk about. But Rabbi Yonatan Halevy has a second idea, not just a verse from the Torah, you can't believe in a physical God. Rabbi Yonatan Halevy has a second idea about a Kadosh Baruch Hu. How could we not elevate Hashem above the physical? But we uplift, we elevate other creations above the physical. What else do we elevate above the physical? What other
physical?
What other things do we consider not physical but they exist?
Your soul?
Oh, very good. Okay, to the next one. Ki asher yidaber imanu mimoshe v'yaskil v'yanhig. When Moshe spoke to us, for example, I skipped the line. Kinefesh amdaberet asher hi adam bemet. The soul which speaks through you is not your body; it's a neshama. When a person passes away, there's still a dead body here. It can't speak anymore because the neshama is no longer there. What is the essence of a person? His neshama. If someone were to tell you that a person doesn't have a neshama, so what happens when they pass away? What changed? It's the same nose, the same eyes, the same brain, the same heart. What happened? The neshama moved. The neshama went up. The neshama is who is really speaking inside of a person. It says when Moshe Rabbeinu used to speak to us and he led us, it wasn't his tongue that spoke or his heart that felt or his mind that thought. These are utensils, these are things that Moshe used in order to speak or in order to think or in order to feel. Moshe nefesh medaberet, makeret. Moshe had a soul which was conscious, a soul which was discerning, which was speaking. Einena geshem, it's not physical, v'einena nigbelet b'makom, and it cannot be bound by space. ולא יצר ממנה מקום ולא תצר היא מהכלל בצורות כל הבירואים. So it doesn't have the capacity to be filled. It doesn't take up any space. ואנחנו מתארים אותה בתארים מלאכותיים, רוחניים, כל שכן בורא הקוד ברח. We even ascribe to it some kind of spiritual qualities. How much more so the HaKadosh Baruch Hu who created the soul? I mean, it's an impossible thing to believe that Hashem is physical. It just goes against logic. Rabbi Yonatan Halevy did hear something that you may not have noticed. And that is like a good philosopher. He gave you an argument from the Torah. That was his first argument. It says there's no physical God. And the second thing he did was give you a logical argument. It's an important thing. Not just to say, I once made a mistake as a rabbi. I made many mistakes, but this was a bad mistake. I was teaching in Yerushalayim, post-high school boys. They had a different life. First time away from home, living in Israel. Legal age of drinking is 18. Boys and girls are there for a year without their parents. All kinds of things. A lot of learning, a lot of holiness, but also a lot of possibilities to do things that weren't great. And one of my students at the time had asked me, Rabbi, so is it optional, this idea of shomer negiyah, of not touching your girlfriend? Or is it a must? Is it a halakha? So I sat him down. I told him, I'm happy to discuss the idea with you. But the danger of discussing the idea is once you think you understand the idea, say, okay, so I can touch her, but as long as I have certain things in mind, just know, first and foremost, the Torah says you cannot touch. And then I'll explain to you the logic behind it. We sat and explained, and this boy never spoke to me again. At the end of the year, he came over and told me, Rabbi Yonatan, I hate you. I told him what happened. So he told me, I asked you a question. I wanted you to deal with it on a logical level, on an emotional level. Instead, the first thing you told me was, it's not allowed. It says in the Torah, it's not allowed. I didn't appreciate that. It was an unintelligent response. I went back to Rav Perez and said, Rabbi, I'm used to first always sharing, this is the halakha. And now, once you know it's halakha, let's discuss it as much as we want. But I'm not going to lead you to believe that if you walk out in the middle of the conversation, you're going to think that maybe it's not a halakha. So I always make my point first. Rav Perez told me, you're right, and he's right. You have to be sensitive to the situation. In some situations, you don't speak like that. And in some situations, you would have been better off not saying the Torah doesn't let until the end when he got it on a logical level. Rabbi Yonatan Halevy is utilizing both approaches. He's saying it can't be that we believe in a physical God because the Torah says it can be, but also because our logic says that it cannot be. You would think that for a Torah that doesn't believe in a physical God, what was the holiest place in the Beit HaMikdash? The Holy of Holies. The Holy of Holies was inside of a room, a building that was called, it's called the Kodesh Kodeshim. The room the Kodesh Kodeshim was in was called the Kodesh. The Holy of Holies first had a building called the Holy. And then there was a courtyard for men, women, Levim, Kohanim, so on and so forth. Inside of the Beit HaMikdash, there's a story about Titus. Remember Titus? There's a book that was written in this generation. It's a silly book. Wasting people's time. But a lot of people have read it. I'm trying to remember the name. There's two of them. One's called Angels and Demons, and one is called the Da Vinci Code.
Oh, Da Vinci Code.
Back when I was in high school, people were reading these books. And someone came and showed me pages in these books that say that the high priests in the Beit HaMikdash, they would arrange these mass sexual relations that they would do together in the Beit HaMikdash, man and woman and all kinds of crazy things. It doesn't say, it's a disgusting thing to say about what we did in the Beit HaMikdash. I think, where in the world could this person have picked this up? There's a Midrash, and the Midrash tells us that when Titus, Yimach Shmo V'Zichro, his name be erased. Titus is the same thing as Hitler. It's the same name. It's a different person, same name. We feel like we only take recent history into consideration. King Ferdinand and Isabella, there are millions of Jews in the world today that are still suffering because of those two Rashayim. You have to say their name, Yimach Shmo V'Zichro. May their name be erased, their memory be erased. It must. Titus, Yimach Shmo V'Zichro. He when he came into the Beit HaMikdash, was destroying the Beit HaMikdash and cutting up the parochet and ripping things to the floor and killing the Kohen and his daughter in the same blood, all kinds of terrible things which he did. He comes inside of the Kodesh Kodeshim, the Holy of Holies. The Kohen Gadol could only go there and one day a year. And there were these two on top of the Aron Kodesh and the Holy Ark. There were two. Right? What do they call them in English? Cherubs? Cherubs. Two angels.
Yeah.
They're angels, but they had faces like babies. That's what it says. And normally, when the Jewish people were doing Avirot, their wings turned to each other and they faced away. And when Jews were good, they were facing each other. When Titus came in, he found the two angels were hugging each other. The shape, the golden shape, they were both hugging each other, embracing each other, as if they were crying. This is the end of their career. The Rambam and the Moreh Nevuchim, and the guys that are perplexed, says a religion that is all about not making Hashem physical. We denounce Avodah Zarah. Hashem tells us in the Holy of Holies to make two golden images of angels. It's an absurd thing. You ever thought about it? We're not. I don't know if you know these halachot. You're not allowed to have statues in your house, for example. I bet in many Jewish houses they have a statue of a person. It's not allowed. It's not allowed. This is lo tasa. You can't make such a thing. So are there ways to get around it? And if there's only half a statue, okay, there are ways to get around it. Technically, for example, in the olden days, the real religious Jews didn't let their children play with dolls. Now, there have been all kinds of heterim since then, dolls, and if it has half a face, I don't know, all kinds of things. I'm not sure about these practical halachot. But on a conceptual level, the Torah says you can't make any images, and inside of the Beit HaMikdash, you're going to put two angels made out of gold on top of the Aron, the Holy of Holies. The Kohen goes there in the Yom Kippurim. If there was a picture of a rabbi in this Beit Knesset, you would not be allowed to pray in it. You're not allowed to have pictures in a Beit Knesset of anything. If you want to have a menorah, Chanukah, fine. But you can't have a picture, let's say in the old Beit Knesset, we had a picture of Rabbi Yosef inside. I made sure that it moved out. You can't have such a thing in the Beit Knesset. Oh, he was a holy man? I know he was a holy man. But he has no place in the Beit Knesset. There's only a place to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Oh, what about a Beit Knesset that has a picture in the back of the Beit Knesset? It's great. So when you turn around and you bow down, Boy B'Shalom, you're bowing down to the picture. It's asur, asur, asur. There's no leniency in the world to have such a thing. And for generations, we fought this war. When you come into a synagogue, and on the parochet, there's two lions. Do you know how many poskim cried in bed at night because the people putting lions inside of the Beit HaMikdash, inside of the synagogue? Not because they're not kosher animals, and there's no such halacha, but because you don't have animals inside of a Beit Knesset. This is a holy place. Holy place means we believe in one Hashem. It can't be that a Christian is going to come off the street, look in the front wall and say, oh, so that's their God, he's a lion. That's a crazy thing. Because they have such things in their religions. All kinds of statues and angels. So the Rambam says, how could it be in our religion that we have such a thing? The Rambam says something incredible. Now, you have to know there is always going to be a part of these angels that we don't really understand. Why are they doing that in the first place? What is there? Why HaKadosh Baruch Hu needs them there? There are, according to Kabbalah, many deep ideas behind these things. But according to Pshat, the Rambam says it would really have been a problem if we had one angel. We all know we believe in one God. And so a person who would see in a Jewish place there are two of them would already automatically know that it's not talking about God, because we don't believe in two gods. And it could be that the same reason why people were lenient about the lions. Because there's always two, it's not one. But it's a mistake. There's a Sifri, I don't remember, one of the books of our rabbis there say, you might think that you could learn from here that in every holy place you could put pictures of angels. And our rabbi say, no, this was a one-time exception that Hashem put into the DNA of the Beit HaMikdash that you are never allowed to replicate again in history.
It was in the Holy of Holies, so who saw it?
The Kohen Gadol, but
Once a year.
still. You think in our holiest place we put idols?
So they wasn't an idol.
So the Rambam mentions something beautiful. The Rambam, or the commentaries of the Rambam, understand these angels, they were shaped in a way I've never seen them. Their wings were meant to hold something. It looks like they're holding up the whole world, holding up Hashem, holding up the heavens. And the Rambam says, you see from here, that the only place you're allowed to think about, you could think about people, you could think about angels, you could think about all kinds of celestial beings, you could think about these two angels on top of the Aron Kodesh. But once you see what they're holding up, There you're not allowed to think about it anymore. There you can't put into physical form Hashem. You can't think about it. What does Hashem look like? What does Hashem smell like? What does Hashem talk like? It just doesn't work that way. And the Rambam therefore says there were two, not one, and they were holding something which was invisible. The reason being to show you they were holding up a world that you have no permission to make into physical. You have no permission to make it into something physical. And so Rabbi Yonatan Halevy chooses both approaches, both the Torah's approach and the logical approach. And B'ezras Hashem, next week we're going to ask an interesting question. If this is true, that you're not allowed to imagine a physical HaKadosh Baruch Hu, then why does the Torah say the things that it says? Hashem's mighty hand, Hashem's mighty arm, or more than that. If not, why does the Torah say it? So how did Hashem do it if he had no... How did Hashem split the sea if he doesn't have anything to split the sea with?
That's an absurd question.
Why? How did Hashem write that Luchot? It says it was art, Maseh, it was the handwork of Hashem. How was it the handiwork of Hashem? Hashem doesn't have hands.
It's anthropomorphizing it so we could understand it.
Right, but at the end of this, so how did he do it then? I want to understand, how did Hashem give a Torah that he can't write if he didn't write? How did he do it?
Of course he could write it.
He can't. We say he doesn't have a hand.
Well, Moshe wrote it.
The second tablet.
Oh.
We're assuming that Hashem has to do things the way we do. He doesn't.
Okay, so Marlene is hitting. There's a pasuk that says
Write it with his hand.
he doesn't have hands.
I mean, he created the world. Can he create?
Very good. How did he create the world?
How do we really know? We don't really know.
Okay, so Marlene is saying something. It says, "Ki lo machshavotay machshavotechem." My thoughts are not your thoughts. V'lo darkai darki darkechem. I don't know the exact vowels. And my ways are not your ways either, says the prophet. Hashem says, we could think we understand Hashem, but whatever we think, we really don't get it.
Just don't know.
It's true, but there have to be certain questions that must be addressed, that must be analyzed. And you have to know that at the end of the day, obviously we don't believe in the physical Hashem. We don't believe that Hashem has hands. We don't believe that Hashem... And even questions, so how does Hashem do X? They're not really so relevant to us. So he did it. How he did it? Hashem is Hashem. Hashem does all kinds of things. But there will have to come to a certain point where we'll believe Hashem doesn't have a form, doesn't have a body, doesn't have a physicality. At the same time, he's able to accomplish physical things without intermediaries. See, when Har Sinai, Hashem spoke, but if he doesn't have a mouth, how did he speak? So are you telling me that there was an angel that came and spoke for him? No, because God forbid to believe that Hashem put an intermediary between us. And therefore there has to be a certain duality. And this duality, by the way, is where half of Kabbalah sits. Half of Kabbalah exists, and most people don't know this about Kabbalah, is to explain this duality. How is Hashem both one thing and another thing? It's a duality that Hashem is able to do physical things without a physical form.
Why is it duality?
There's two things that seem to contradict each other with a logical mind.
He created it all.
But Marlene, we're talking in logical terms. Either he can do things that are physical because he has physical parts, or he can't do things that are physical because he doesn't have physical parts.
Why would anybody ever say you have to understand Hashem's ways using our logic? It doesn't make any sense.
Very good. So this is where Kabbalah steps in. It says you are understanding the world through your logic. You have to start understanding things through Hashem's logic. And well, this is where Kabbalah purports to be at least bringing us closer, one step closer, to understanding Hashem's way of thinking. Hashem's, as much as a human can understand, the way the world would look then. And even then it has questions and problems. But there is a complexity in the world. You know, the Rav Kook mentions the same way that Hashem must be all-powerful and all-knowing and all-capable, all kinds of things in order to be Hashem. If Hashem is all-powerful, does he lack the ability to be powerless? And listen, if he lacks the ability to be powerless, is he really Hashem? Because if he lacks an ability, by definition, he can't be Hashem.
But isn't that more of a semantic argument than a real argument? That's a real question. Why would you? What would he do?
I'll tell you the practical side of it.
Okay.
Rav Kook says that if certain things were not written in our prayer book, we would not be allowed to say them. How can I say that Hashem is all-knowing, omnipotent? That was the word, omnipresent, right? How can you say such things? By saying that Hashem is that, you are taking away from him the ability to not be that. Who are you to define Hashem?
So we're trying to use words to define.
But
to a
the
certain-
danger of using words is that you're then going to end up defining not a full definition.
Absolutely, but if you don't use words, how is the person going to relate to it?
Very good. So this is it's a stuck. We're in a bind.
Well, you have to understand, obviously, that the words are limited, our concepts are limited, our knowledge is limited.
Very good. Very good. You're right. That's the ultimate answer. That's what we'll be discussing next week, God willing. Yeah, but for now, you should know that we never end off on questions about HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's why we always say, Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Hashem is one. He's our God, the only God. Hashem Elokim, He is Elokim. Hashem Melech, Hashem Malach. He's the King. He was the King. He always will be the King. And that's why we say this at the end, so we don't leave off, God forbid, on any notes of doubt. B'ezrat Hashem.